Hello everybody. Welcome back to the Lite4j tutorial by Coding Muscles. This is chapter 4 where we will be creating all four basic REST APIs using Lite4j. This will include creation of get, post, put and delete APIs using the Lite4j framework. So we have a lot of coding to do, so let's go into it. So first of all, I want to explain what we will be covering in this tutorial. As said before, and as the title suggests, we will be creating the get, post, put, and delete APIs using Lite4j. And in doing so, we will be going in depth upon how path variables work in Lite4j, as well as we'll also be covering how the payload transfer works in Lite4j framework. Importantly, this tutorial will not be using any database, and the object that we will be saving will be in the local memory of the server, and we will be using just a simple array list to demonstrate this example. Obviously, this will be wiped out every time the server restarts, and it will not be persisted. But if you're already coming from Spring or Spring Boot background, you would know exactly what steps to take in order to persist this data. However, this tutorial does not focus on persisting data, and this is just for the demonstration of how the path variables and the payload work. So let's get into it. All right, so last time we did create a hello handler, but let's not focus on that. So as a starting point, if you can start your server and it is working on 8443 and you're able to hit the localhost 8443 slash server slash info and get a positive response back, that is a good starting point. So we are going to build on top of that, and let's start by creating an object in the already existing model package named fruit. So this is going to be the object that we are going to be playing with. It's going to have a private int id, a private string name, and private int weight. I'm gonna quickly create its getters and setters. I'm also gonna generate a constructor with all arguments and a constructor with no arguments. Another thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna generate a toString method. I'm not sure if it will be very useful or not at the moment, but it's just better to have it. So our Pojo class is ready with ID, name, weight. It's no argument constructor and all arguments constructor, and it's getters and setters. Feel free to use the Lombok dependency, but if you don't know about that, it's totally fine. So now we have already have a handlers package, but I'm gonna create another package named fruit handler. I'm also gonna create a package named service and another package named util. All right. So now let's go to our handler.yml file. And as we have so many get services, let's take one as an example, paste it below, and rename it to fruits. It's going to be a get request, and its tag is going to be all fruits. Now let's go above in the handlers right here. Let's define our handler here. Now we'll have to create a handler. So let's go into fruit handler, Java class, fruits get handler. There is a convention of naming, as we see in the examples in the handler as well, like pets get handler, pets pet ID get a handler, pet post handler. So this is going to be fruits get handler. All right. And it is going to implement the light HTTP handler, which means it has to implement the method request handler with the exchange object. This HTTP server exchange object is the representation of the exchange between the client and the server. It contains the request body, response body, HTTP methods, and details such as header, status code, and cookies. So we're gonna copy the reference path and paste it over here. So what is gonna happen is gonna receive a request at slash fruits. It's gonna recognize that it is a get method, and this handler is gonna be called all fruits. It will search for all fruits in the list, and it's gonna find it here. It's gonna know which class it has to execute, and it will call in the handle request method. So in this method, the first thing is to do a system.out.println and just print out that the get handler has been reached. So the first thing we are gonna do is set the content type of response, collect the response, and third step, send back the response. That is status code and data. So in order to set the content type of response, we're going to do a HTTP server exchange, get response header, add a new response header, a new HTTP string named content type. Its value is going to be application JSON. So in order to collect the data, let's just on the fly create a list of fruits. Let's add another fruit, just like we added an apple. Let's add ID2. Name can be banana. Its weight can be probably 15. That's quite heavy banana. All right, so now we have some data to send back. Let's just call the HTTP exchange object and set the status code to 200, which means OK. And we're going to call HTTP server exchange get response sender. And we're going to send the fruits dot toString, because we can always only send string in the HTTP sender response dot send method. So we're going to call the fruits dot toString. So let's just quickly run it and let's see what we get. Server started. Let me duplicate that. Localhost slash fruits. All right, so we get the expected data, but the problem is that this is not in JSON format. So in order to have it in JSON format, we'll have to create a method in the utility class. Let's create a new class first named utility. Let's make a public static method which is going to return a string. And its name is going to be a JSON string from object. So basically, any object is going to be passed into this method and it's going to return a JSON string. So let's define a result, which is an empty string that is going to return. Inside the try block, let's have an object writer and make sure to use the com.fasterxml Jackson databind object writer, not any other ones. So new object mapper dot writer with default pretty printer. So result is gonna be writer dot write value as string for the object that we passed in. So it's gonna require us to add a catch clause, which we do, and then we return the result. All right. So we have segregated a method in our utility class. We've made it a static method so that it can be called without the initialization of utility class. So it'll be better to move this logic also in our service file. So handlers will only act as a controller, which will receive the request and send the response. And all this core logic will go into a service file. So let's do that movement. Let's make a new class named fruit basket service. And it is going to have a private static list. In case we do not do the list, in case we do not make this list static, it's going to have some problems, such as if we add a fruit to the list, it will not be reflected in the next get request that we send. That is because by default, Lite4j runs each request, may or may not run each request in a separate thread. So in order to protect our data while the server is up, it's good to have static implemented. So let's create a method named public list, which has the return type of list of fruits, and its name would be get fruits. And if it finds that fruits is null, it's going to initialize the fruits list and add two objects to it and then return. Otherwise, what it's going to do is it's going to S out. Otherwise, it is going to S out returning existing fruit and it's going to give back the fruits. So we'll just use this get fruits method. This will initialize in case our fruit list is not initialized. And if it's already initialized, it will return whatever it has in the memory. So here what we are going to do is we're going to collect the response. So we'll have to make a fruit basket service, name it service. So now let's see what we have in service.getFruits. Let's do a dot toString. All right, now let's run that. Server is running, but most likely we will not get a JSON response, and we got the same response. That is because we haven't used the utility method that we created, which will return JSON string from object. So let's do that. Cut this part, call the utility dot get JSON from string, paste it. In this case, we'll have to remove the toString method as it is expecting an object and not a string. So now let's run it. All right, we get the JSON nice and clean. So that was it for a basic get service. Now let's make a service that takes input as fruit slash an integer such as 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever, and gives in response the relevant fruit with the similar ID. So let me duplicate that. So in order to make such an API, let's go back. So it's going to be fruit slash fruit underscore ID, where the integer is going to be passed, and its name is going to be get fruit by ID. So let's create a new handler class. Fruit ID get handler. Previously we had fruits get handler, and this is specifically fruit ID get handler. We're going to copy the reference, get fruit by ID, go above. All right. So our get fruit ID is matching this handler, and this will in turn call the. We'll have to implement the light HTTP handler interface, which will force us to implement the handle request. All right. So now an important problem here is we need to capture the fruit ID, for example, that is being sent from the requester into the server side. So let's start coding. First of all, I'm gonna do is I'm gonna s out reached get ID handler to make sure that at least this piece of code is working. What I'm gonna do is add a response header. set it to application/JSON. So in the utility class, I'm going to create another method named public static int get param by header name, which is going to take in the HTTP server exchange request and a string. So first of all, I'm going to create a map of string and string. Let's name it params or parameters. And let's use a deque of type string, key names, and it's going to be exchange.getQueryParameters. So for map.entries, it should have been a capital E. Okay, map.entry, string and deque of strings. I'm going to name it entry. And it's going to iterate the pnames.entry set. So iterated of string p values is going to be entry dot net value dot iterator, and if p values dot has next, then params is going to put pname and p values dot next. So what this code essentially allows us to do is it creates a map of all the parameters that that path variable is going to throw us. Let's say we have a new string value. So this is the magic line essentially. What it's doing is it's getting the input, and out of the params map that we created, which is of type string, it's gonna fetch the value of whatever is passed in this input. So all we have to do is return the integer dot value of value. So this is going to be a string, but we want an integer. And let's see how this method is being called. So right here, what we do is call the utility.get parameters by header. And we know for a fact from our handler YAML file that we are expecting a fruit underscore ID. So let's just pass it in as an input. And the first object is going to be the HTTP server exchange, obviously. So let me cut this, do a quick S out. So let's just see if it is catching the correct ID or not. Stop and rerun. All right, the server is up and running at port 8443. Let's see if fruits is running. It is running well. Let's provide an ID like 12. It did not give any response back, but if you look at the console, it is catching the parameters really well. So let's try one more time. 1223, and we got the request of it as well. Okay, so this piece of code is working in utility class. Essentially, it is creating a map, and from that map, it is searching for its value. And from value, we are converting it to an integer and sending it back into our fruit get ID. So now that we have the correct ID, so all we have to do is create a service that gives us the fruit which is of the relevant ID. So let's store that in fruit ID, and let's go to our fruit basket service. Let's create a new method which will be public and return us a fruit named get fruit by ID, and the input is an ID. So what it is gonna do is for fruit in fruits list, if ID is equal to fruit dot get ID, it is gonna return us the fruit. Otherwise, if the loop completes and nothing is returned, it is gonna return us null. All right, that looks good. So we go to our get fruit ID handler. Let's create a new object, my fruit, and it is going to be, let's initialize our service first. Fruit basket service is new fruit basket service. Service.getFruit by ID, and we're gonna pass in the fruit ID that we got in the previous line. So if my fruit ID is null, then in the HTTP exchange, we're gonna set the status code to 404, which, as you already guessed, is the code for not found. And let's send a string, fruit not found. Otherwise, what is gonna happen is HTTP server exchange is gonna set the status code of 200, which means okay. And what we are gonna send is, it's called the utility class to get the JSON object of my fruit. So basically, if it is null, when we do a dot send, that kind of returns the handle request object, and that kind of returns back from the handle request method. So it is like a return statement, even though we are not using the keyword return. So let's find out how this code runs. So let's just see if all fruits are running. I think the server is not up yet. All right, so all fruits are running. Let's try with ID 1223. Fruit ID not found, but let's try with ID 1, and fruit ID was found. Now, if you would see, this is returning us kind of a text, but it's not JSON by default. So the error is that content, it should have been hyphen, and the type should be a capital T. All right, now if you rerun this, if we are getting all the fruits, all right, and we are getting the ID, yes, we are. And now it is by default in JSON. So let me just quickly update some code in the fruit basket service. Let me add a null check before the loop starts. All right, uh, looking good so far. All right, so now we will be working upon post service, which means let's rename this to add fruit and change its method to post. And of course, being a post request, it will be having body raw JSON. And let's just prepare the data from our side. Pineapple with the weight of 15. Its URL would be just fruit. So let's go start mapping from the handler. So the path is going to be fruit. The method is going to be post. Now for post and put, whenever we are passing in a body in the payload, we have to also tag it with body. Body handler needs to be also included in its chain. So let's go have a look where body is. Yeah, right here. So basically we need to initialize the body handler, otherwise the service will not recognize who this is. So now let's create a post handler. Fruit post handler, you know the drill. Implements light HTTP handler. Let's implement the method. All right, so far so good. Post handler reached. Let's print that line out. HTTP server exchange dot get response header. Let's add a new header. Content type and set it to application/JSON. All right, now to catch a body, all we have to do is we have to create a new map of string and object, and make sure to use the correct package. The correct package of body handler would be com.networknt.body. So if we include body handler dot request body, essentially we are catching whatever payload we get from here. But now we need to transform it into our own personal fruit object. So all we have to do is initialize an object, fruit, name it whatever you want. In this case, we'll name it my fruit. We're going to use the network nt config, get instance, get mapper, and we're going to use the convert value function, which converts the value of body to fruit.class. All right, that's it. Now let's just, for demonstration purpose, oh, I forgot to refer it. So let me just copy its reference path. And in the executable after body, I can directly give the handler path. All I have to do is define it in one of the business handler. All right, let's see. So if we do get all fruits, and when we try to add it, at least it is being caught here, the fruit object. So now the only thing we have to do is create a service, go to the fruit service and create logic to add it into the list. So public, let's just return the let's just return a string in this case. Okay, very simple logic. We are not checking if there is a redundant ID. We are simply adding it into the list of the fruits. Pretty good enough for now, I would say. So all it's gonna do is it's gonna call the service and add the fruit. And let's just do a HTTP exchange. Set status code to 200 always, and get response sender. And let's send a string added. And let's comment that out because we don't need that anymore. All right, so our post logic is ready as well. Let's test it out. Server is up and running. Can we get all fruits? Yes, we can. Can we store the pineapple with ID 5? Added. Let's test it out. All right, cool. So just to reiterate, this is only possible because I'm using static keyword while defining the list of fruits. That's why the data is persistent. If I don't have static right here, then the data would be lost. All right, so now let's take same inspiration from get and post and combine them into working our put method. So input method, we would need a environment. Input method, we would need a path variable as well as body. So the name can be update fruit by ID. So we have defined update fruit by ID, and let's create its relevant handler. It's going to implement the light HTTP handler and implement the handler request method. So same as we did in get handler, until we get the ID, let's just reuse the code that we had worked upon. Instead of get ID, I'll just s out that reached put ID. Content type is application JSON. We will be able to extract the fruit ID from the parameter as long as it matches the value in handler YAML file. So we are reusing the code for path variable that we got from get API, and we are reusing the code for getting the payload from post API. So combining these two, we have my fruit and the payload fruit. So if my fruit, so if my fruit is not equal to null, then here we will write the logic for update. Else, we're gonna say HTTP set status code to 404. Get response sender, send. Fruit not found for ID, and we're gonna tell the fruit ID. Let's write an S out to have the consistency. Okay, now if the fruit is not null, and we're gonna pass the fruit ID as well as the payload fruit. So let's create this method, which will be returning fruit, and all it's gonna do is fruits, which is the list, get the fruit ID, set name to payload fruit dot get name. Similarly, fruits dot get index, get of index of the fruit ID, set weight to payload fruit dot get weight, and it's gonna in the end return fruit dot get fruit ID. So basically, on the fly, it's gonna grab the index that we pass, which we know is not null, from the list, set it to the payload fruit name. Similarly, it's gonna grab the same fruit once again and set the weight to the payload fruit weight. And in the end, it's gonna return the fruit with the same ID. So we're gonna set the status code as 200, and because this line is returning a fruit object, all we have to do is let's just return the updated value. But because it is expecting a string, we'll have to use the utility.get JSON string from object method and then pass in our object. All right. All right, looks good. If we go to handler YAML, path, update fruit by ID. Okay, I think we forgot to add its. All right, now looks good. I have copied the path reference, and update by fruit ID is mentioned, which is same as the one we are using down here after the body tag. So everything looks good. Let's try to run it. Running on 8443. All fruits are running fine. Let's add another fruit. It is added. Now let me replicate the post request we have. Let's say we are trying to update the fruit with ID 5, and what we are trying to do is turn it to grapes with weight of 7. So currently we have 5 pineapple and error. Okay, what error did we get? Oh, okay, index out of bound. Okay, so basically it's so instead of index we should get that fruit. So what we should have done is All right, then right here will return the fruit because the ID is going to remain the same anyway. Okay, so this is a better logic. Sorry for the inconvenience. All right, so if we get all fruits, it's fine. If we add a fruit with ID 5, it is added hopefully, yes. And if we update it to grapes with weight 17, all right, it is added. Let's see one more time. All right, so update is also working fine. So now on to delete. All right, guys, so delete is going to be very similar to the put one, only it will not be having any body. So let's get rid of the body, change it to delete, and it is gonna have a header. It's gonna find that ID and delete it from its temporary memory. So without wasting any time, let's create a new fruit ID delete handler. Okay, implements light HTTP handler and implements its handle request method. Let's system.out delete handler reached. All right, cool. So let's go ahead and handler YAML file. Let's take a copy of this put body. Let them know that the method is going to be delete. Body is not required, but delete fruit by ID. A tag is required. Delete fruit by ID, and let's go ahead and copy the reference and paste it somewhere. So there are two ways to do it. One way is either we can specify the tag that we use below, which is delete fruit by ID. The other way would be to simply remove that, have it as a business handler like this, and all the way down, instead of using a tag, just using the whole business handler. So yeah, let's go with that approach. So the controller is going to reach here. It's going to bring in some parameter, which we will fetch from the code base later. It's going to be of delete method. This particular class will be called, which is defined above, right here. Okay, so essentially it'll reach here. Now, just like we did in get ID or put handler, we need to extract the fruit ID, which we do pretty comfortably. Service is not defined, but that is not a big issue because fruit basket service is equal to new fruit basket. Done. All right, so it is gonna fetch a fruit, but that's too much of an operation. What we should do is that go into the service basket itself and create a function, public boolean, delete fruit by ID, So we're gonna get the entry of the ID provided into temp fruit, and if temp fruit is not null, then all we have to do is fruits dot remove temp fruit and return true. Else we return false. That's it. Done. Okay, let's get back to delete fruit. So okay, so what's happening here is we get the fruit ID. Then we call the service to delete fruit by ID by passing in the fruit ID. So let's store that in result bool. So if result bool is true, so we can set the citrus code to 200. It's okay, deleted. And what do we send? We send, okay, we just send deleted fruit with ID, fruit ID. Or else we just say 404, no fruit found with ID as fruit ID. All right, I think that's that. Let's go ahead and test it. So are we getting all the fruits? Yeah. So if we delete the fruit with ID 2, deleted fruit with ID 2, let's check. Okay, it got deleted. So let's add another fruit. 5 pineapple with weight of 1. Pretty small pineapple. It is added. Okay. Now let's add, remove the fruit with ID 1. Working fine. Let's remove the ID with ID 5 as well. Working fine. Now if we try to do that again, no fruit found with ID 5 because there is no fruit. All right, so this is working well. So let's rerun the server. So in a nutshell, our get all fruit service is giving us the list of all the fruits which we initialize to ID 1 for apple and ID 2 for banana. The get fruit by ID gives us the only the object of the fruit that we request for. Add fruit goes ahead and adds the fruit and takes JSON as a payload, and it is reflected in other services as well, which is nice. And finally, our put API, what it does is it takes the already existing fruit ID, 5 in this case, and replaces it with grapes, 170 pounds of grapes. So that is also working very well. And in the end, we had delete, who is about to delete banana. And let's check that out. All right, working well. Yeah, working real well. All right, so coming back to the presentation, it's time for the summary. So we created all 4 basic REST APIs in Lite4j, which were get, post, put, and delete. And we also saw how we can extract the path variables as well as the payload using the HTTP Server Exchange Object. The most important thing we learned about the HTTP Server Exchange Object is that it represents an exchange between the client and the server. It contains information such as the request and response body and other information, for example, header, the method used, the URI, and other things such as status codes and cookies. It may also contain additional information such as remote address and protocol version. So, this was the tutorial. Thanks for tuning into Coding Muscles. That's the end of chapter 4. We did all the basics of REST APIs in Lite4j. And if you are skilled in other skills such as JDBC connection and Spring Boot, it won't be very difficult for you to do persist data in a real database. The example of this video was just to demonstrate how the path variables and payload can be extracted in Lite4j. I'll be leaving all the links in the description for the documentation as well as my code for in the GitHub for your testing purpose. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time. Bye.